We're going to talk about what was my favorite TV show when I was about 7 years old, and who knew that I would grow up and become a professor of television studies. And I was asked at one point here at Fullerton to do a summer program we have for Student Gear Up, which is a program for students from high schools who are going to be introduced to what college is like so they can be more comfortable signing up, right? So it's low-income, high-achieving kids. And so for that, they asked me to do a class in critical studies, right, which is how to see into television programming, what was the ideology, what was behind the ideas of the show. And in doing that, I thought, well, gee, I want to talk about something I want to talk about. So I chose my favorite show, which I hadn't really looked at in years, only to find that it was far more innovative than I had ever given it credit for as a kid. As a kid, all I wanted was to meet Mickey Dolenz, who's the guy on the far right, in case you don't know that, because you're too young to know who I'm talking about right now. But that was really funny to me, and the kids reacted well to the show. And that taught me that it did have something to say to a newer generation. So I thought, And then I ended up writing an article. I'm on the editorial board of Written By Magazine, which is the magazine of the Writers Guild of America. And I wrote an article about the show because we write about writers. So I thought to myself, how many of the writers are still alive? And they were about 7 of the original 15, and they were welcome to chat about their time on the show. So I met with them at their various homes in Beverly Hills, because they made a lot of money in television way back in the day, and found that many of them grew up. They were young when they wrote on this show. They were all newcomers, and many of them went on to win Emmy Awards, including Treva Silverman, who was the first female to be on a comedy show without a male partner. So she was solo writing on the show, and we're talking about 1966. So that was a big deal, not to have a boy help you, right? So we're all going, oh my gosh, really? So meeting all those folks was really interesting, and I realized I had much more material than just for that article. So then I started looking around, and I realized there were critical studies books explaining Gilligan's Island, and the Brady Bunch, and Hogan's Heroes, and there wasn't a book about the Monkees, which shocked me, and I also knew at that time that their 50th anniversary was coming up. So that's a great time to get some free publicity. So I put the book together and was able to put it out that same year, so that was really a lot of fun. So we'll talk about how the Monkees changed television. First of all, you'll notice in this picture, the show won 2 Emmys in its first year, right? So this isn't some piece of fluff that's just for little children, right? They won for Best New Comedy Series, right, which ranks them right up there with Seinfeld and The Big Bang Theory and all the major shows. And they won for Best Director, who happened to be James Frawley, who was a new young guy in town. He grew up to direct the original Muppets movie and win several awards in his career. So this is how he got started. And you'll see some similarities between the 4 guys and the Muppets, right? They're all kind of just characters having fun. So just to let you know who I am, as John was happy to say, I was a television writer for many years. I wrote on Beverly Hills 90210, a show called Picket Fences, which I adored but was canceled in its 3rd season. And I spent a long time on Touched by an Angel. I did a documentary for ABC News Nightline, which was based on the American Legion Boys Nation group. In their 50th anniversary year from 1963, they had all met President John Kennedy. And in 1993, Bill Clinton, who was one of them, was president of the United States. And they had a reunion at the White House. And so I got to meet with them and interview them about their life and what they had lived through. So that was really fun. Also, in the book world, not only have I done the Monkees book, but I've done in our library here the Women in American History. It's a 4-volume encyclopedia series. I think they have an ebook version of it here that I just put out last year as well, which is really interesting because we covered women in history and popular culture, and often you don't blend those. So our little tagline was, you'll meet Lady Bird Johnson and Lady Gaga all in the same book, right? So that's cool. My most recent one is a novel on Filippo Mezzé, who was the man who owned the plantation next door to Thomas Jefferson. He was an Italian immigrant, and he wrote the words, "All men are created equal," in a pamphlet. And Thomas Jefferson liked it, and you know where it appeared later. So he's a pretty cool guy. I liked him. So that's what I do. I'm also on the book review board for the Journal of Screenwriting, and as I just noticed, Written By Magazine. So let's get back to the Monkees, because that's what we're here for, because they're my guys, right? Before the show went on the air, this is what you were watching on television. Notice most of them are black and white. Nothing wrong with black and white. Sometimes I have students who say, oh, for a black and white movie, that wasn't so bad. And I have to remind them it's not the writer's fault the technology didn't have color yet. But you can see that these are more or less quieter, gentler, blander family shows. Nothing wrong with them. Andy Griffith is quite fun. Dragnet, was as serious as one could be in TV back in the day. But this is what you had going on. You notice in the far corner, just for fun, see that face? Circus Boy? 1950s. That's Mickey Dolenz as a 10-year-old. He was a child star. Wow. He already had a TV show before the Monkees ever happened. His father was a TV star. George Dolenz, he was the Count of Monte Cristo in 1958. And so, one day his agent said, they're doing a show called Circus Boy. Do you think your kid could be the Circus Boy? And the dad said, you know how much money they'll pay? Yeah, my kid can do that. But they blonded his hair out because they thought he looked too ethnic because he was Italian. Yeah, right? Ethnic, Italian back in the day. That was as ethnic as we were going to go. So then we come to what I'm going to talk about, which is the various major chapters in the book, how this show spread some social justice messages, which was shocking, and other shows will be canceled for having tried that, particularly the Smothers Brothers laughed and got in trouble for it. This show, I didn't realize as a kid until I looked at all 58 episodes over and over again to write the book, actually said something about feminism because every single girl that dated one of these boys had a job. None of them was a bubble-headed cheerleader. None of them was just waiting around to marry someone to take care of her. They were all women with jobs. Yeah, there might have been record stores and whatever, but they were jobs. And I think that was an interesting message in 1966. We'll also talk briefly about metatextuality, which is the big thing in critical studies. How were they speaking to the audience? It's breaking the fourth wall. It's a Shakespearean thing. For this show particularly, identity construction. These guys went through a lot because of how their names were actually used in the program. Just like Jerry Seinfeld, they went by their real names. And this gets very confusing when fans want to understand, are you really that goofy guy in the TV show? No, I'm not. I'm actually a grown man and I have kids, but I can't tell you that because then you won't dream or fantasize about marrying me someday, right? So that was a big deal on this show, and it really harmed them in their later career. And then a little bit on the cultural cachet, how much they've lasted over the years. So this is after 1968. So when the show ended in 1968, look what happened to TV. It exploded with the 60s and the whole hippie culture, and all these ideas that were little baby ideas in the Monkees took over television, right? The Mod Squad, first show that had an African American working with two white characters as policemen, and they were young, hip policemen who would go undercover. This is way pre-21 Jump Street, and I'm talking about the show, not the movie. Right? So this is huge, right? Here's the Smothers Brothers, as I mentioned. They're going to get canceled for talking about the Vietnam War. The Monkees got away with it. They thought only children were watching the program. They didn't realize the messages that these 10-year-olds in 1968 are going to be 18 in the early 70s, and they're going to be protesting the war, right? MASH, of course, the first time we get really serious about war on television, and Laugh-In, which I think is funny. So, back in the day, I just mentioned the war. They did have many moments where they referenced the war on poverty, and President Lyndon Johnson. And they mentioned particularly, there was a great episode where they were playing dominoes, and they dropped all the dominoes. And then Davy Jones said to Peter Tork, what do you call this game? And Peter Tork said, Southeast Asia. And nobody cut that, right? Because nobody who was a censor at the network understood what that meant, which is pretty shocking if you ask me. Now this is Dr. Timothy Leary, who was famous back in the day for dropping LSD and whatnot and taking experiments with the psyche. And he was watching the program and defining it and recognizing that it was far deeper than anyone else had given it the thought before. So already in the 60s, people in the know knew that this was something different and worth paying attention to, right? This is a song that Mickey's famous for singing. He wrote it while he was in England. He heard this phrase, Randy Scouse git. He didn't know what it meant. He thought they were funny words. It's actually, it's cussing in English. And it was from a TV show that is the TV show that in America we based All in the Family on. right? And so it was the older man yelling at his son-in-law, calling him a randy scouse git. Randy means you have too much sex, and scouse git are bad words. He just thought they were funny words, so he came back and he wrote this song. But think about the lyrics. Why don't you hate who I hate, kill who I kill to be free? If that's not a Vietnam protest war song, I don't know what is. And they got away with singing that on broadcast television in their very trippy hippie clothes, right? So I couldn't believe how much they got away with, frankly, in terms of messages. Now, this is a great shot. I love this from the Associated Press. All three of the men were drafted while they were on the show because they were all like 18, 19, 20 years old. Michael Nesmith had already been in the Air Force, so he was not. But the other three guys were, and they had to find a way around it. Right? Even Davy Jones, who was from England, was drafted because he was living and making money in the United States. These girls took to the streets and said, if Davy goes, we go too. Their protests against losing them were very huge. But in general, they were talking about how this was a bad war. So if you look at this line I love from one of the episodes, they want to put the blame on teenagers. Take the war. Whose fault is it? We're not fighting. It must be those crazy kids. They're the ones doing all the fighting. Again, if that's not an anti-war message wrapped up in a funny show, I have no idea how they got away with that, but they did. Peter Tork, who's pretty brilliant, said they probably got a larger audience for this anti-war point of view than even the Beatles did, because TV was free, and young kids couldn't always afford to buy an album. And the Beatles weren't on TV every week, the Monkees were. So their message got through to those kids on a more regular basis. Who can guess who's Peter Tork sitting with at Monterey Pop Festival? Janis Joplin. There's a whole lot of talk about how nobody took them seriously. People in the music business took them seriously because they were selling millions of records. They hung out together. They played music and jammed at each other's houses over the weekend. They were all friends, right? It was the critics who didn't take their music seriously. And as I was discussing before we started, their music has legs and is still around, so the critics were wrong for once. So when I think about feminism, gender, and sexuality, again, I watched all the episodes again, and the impression when I was a kid was every episode was about Davy falling in love with someone. Turned out that wasn't true. Turns out the other boys fell in love too. But even more so, there were lots of different genres, if you're thinking about TV. Sometimes they did a horror episode. Sometimes they did an entire music video for the whole half hour, running through the streets of Paris. Sometimes they did a rom-com, which was Davy or someone falling in love. Sometimes they did an Old West show. So they introduced students and children to lots of different kinds of genres, which I thought was pretty fun too. In this case, we're looking at Princess Bettina of Harmonica. She's the first character that we meet, the first female in the pilot episode. Oh, take that back. The first episode that aired. The pilot was not the first episode that aired because they felt it was too different from what the show became. So this was about the sixth one that was filmed, and it became the first one on the air. So here it's called Royal Flush, and Princess Bettina comes to the United States, and it turns out her guardian is trying to kill her because at the stroke of her 18th birthday, she takes over the kingdom and he doesn't get to be in charge anymore. So of course, Davy saves her life on the beach from drowning in a little bikini thing. But at the end of the episode, he asks her to stay with him here in the United States. And she says no, because I have responsibilities for the welfare of my people. She turns down the cute boy to do her job. Her job and her responsibility is being queen, right? That's what she's become. It's not about, can I get the cute boy? And I'm like, wow, every girl in America would have said yes to the cute boy. So that was an interesting, to me, feminist thought, that you should think about your position and what you're there to do in the world. It's not just to make some boy happy, right? And then she invites him to come, and it's kind of cute because he says, no, what I have to do is here with the guys in our music, right? We have to spread our message through the world in music. So even he is led by his purpose in the world, not by who am I going to have sex with this week, right? So I think that's really kind of a big statement for a TV show that I was watching when I was a kid. My thesis at the end of the book is, if you were a girl watching in 1966, you learned that to get a monkey, you didn't want to be a cheerleader, you wanted to be a woman of value, because that's who they would look at, right? I thought, oh, that's an interesting message that's stuck in my head, right? Also, I have this little picture here in the corner. This episode flips things because at some point, her guardian kidnaps all four men and she has to do what he says and, you know, give him ownership of the country, or he'll kill them. And I was like, don't I normally see girls get kidnapped and boys have to save them? So here we flip that trope, and the girl had to find a way to defy the bad guy on her own, using her own empowerment, and save the boys. I don't even see that today in modern TV shows. So to me, that was a big step. Also, in the original pilot, which is this one, we meet Jill, who, yes, we're going to see her on the beach. We're going to see that she's wearing, look at that bikini from back in the day. That's a controversial bikini. Can you imagine? Yes, of course, we'll see her on the beach later in the bikini, but we're going to meet her. She works at the record store. So she's a girl with a job. Later in the series, we're going to meet girls who are reporters for newspapers and who are working in television studios. Every time we meet a girl, she's defined by her job first. And that's how the boys get involved with her. So to me, that's a pretty feminist statement in the 1960s. This, if you were a Batman fan from the TV show back in the day, that's Julie Newmar, right? And she guests on the show playing April, who runs a laundromat. And she's getting a PhD in laundry. I'm not really sure what that's all about. It's kind of funny, but she's getting a PhD. Right? And she's the girl all four of them fall in love with. The whole episode is all four of them trying to be what she wants them to be. And when they define what it is, the fastest way to a woman's heart is through her mind. Her mind. That's what matters in a woman. I was like, whoa, that's a really bold statement for back in the day. And then there's an episode called 99-Pound Weakling, where Mickey falls in love with a girl, and look how he defines her. It's about her intelligence. 2 words about how smart she is, only 1 word about how pretty she is. So it's her smarts that makes him want her and go through all this trouble to try to get muscles and whatnot. And it's cute. But never did they want a girl just because she was pretty. And I thought that was particularly unexpected in an era when, on The Big Bang Theory, which having a 250th episode this week, which is lovely, it really is all about who's going to have sex with who next week, right? I mean, that's what the show devolved into in terms of their personal relationships, and this did not. Now, we have to grant you that back in the day they couldn't discuss that on television, but they didn't even go to a point where it was about getting a beautiful girl. It was about getting a smart girl. So that strikes me as very cool. This is my final happy episode. It's called Some Like It Lukewarm. If you're an old movie fan, of course, that's Some Like It Hot. So the writers are making fun of some of their favorite movies. There's a band contest, and everyone shows up and discovers you have to be in a mixed gender band. So they force Davy to dress as the girl, right? And they meet a girls group where they've forced, that's Deanna Martin, Dean Martin's daughter. She and Davy were hooked together in the tabloids as being a relationship, but they really weren't. But it's kind of fun to put them together. So this group, right? So she's doing that. The answer. So the most of the episode is pretty feminist in that there's this girl rock band. Before the Bangles and the Go-Go's, there's a girl rock band, right? The flaw in this one, I feel bad, is when you first meet the women, see how they can all play their own instruments? They're all playing guitars and drums. When the answer, of course, is we are individually lying about having a mixed gendered group, so let's mix our groups together and we'll be telling the truth. But when we do it, look what the girls become. They're the go-go dancers behind the boys playing their instruments. They totally lose their own ability to be rock stars. So that's an unfeminist message that fell in there. And I really would love, but nobody remembers that far back. I'd love to have been in the room and go, you know, at what point did they go, yeah, then the girls will dance. And nobody went, wait, they're supposed to play. I mean, they could all have guitars, but they don't. So that's an unfeminist message. But, you know, you can't always be perfect. Now, we don't have a million hours today, but there's also a lot of chit-chat in what is the world of dressing in drag these days? And is that an insult or not? What are we saying about men when we put them in drag? Some men don't want to do things in drag anymore, even though you could say it's an homage going back to the days of Charlie's Aunt and even before that in Greek comedies. So that's a question. But on this show, they did it a lot, mostly for the jokes. So you can see that all the men at one time or another was in an episode where they were in drag. So I think there's a lot more to consider about what that might have meant. Or are we overthinking that one? I don't know. But it was kind of fun. They all did it at one point or another, including Peter. That's the only time Peter did it. I don't think he looked like a very believable girl. And the rest were just goofing off, of course. But that was one thing that they took for granted. Now, in this metatextuality world, the Monkees weren't the first ones to do it. We can go back to George Burns and Jack Benny, and they talked directly to the screen. George would be having a problem with Gracie. Then he would walk into his study and look right at you and say, well, what's Gracie gotten us into now, right? So talking to the audience, breaking the fourth wall. It's been done before, but no one was doing it right there in the 60s. So I think it's interesting that our guys jumped in and did that. And you see that in a lot of ways. They would write on the screen. So in the pilot, you have dancing, and then typical teenager, no, a friend of the producer. So there are often those kinds of inside jokes. So they're talking to the audience. They're letting you in on the joke, which made a younger audience, a hipper audience, think, wow, we're part of this thing. That's really exciting. Then we also have the fact that they were on NBC, and in one of the episodes, they were running through town, and they were at NBC. All right, so a little knock-knock, cute. In this episode, which I'm sorry, the still is dark, that's Mickey, and he's confronting the werewolf. And the first thing he says to the werewolf is, you know, they won't let you in Disneyland with hair that long. Because at the time, Disneyland had a dress policy, and men with long hair were not allowed in the park as guests. So they were literally putting down a major American corporation in the middle of their program. And they got away with it. And he did that 2 or 3 times across. I would find it in 2 or 3 other episodes. There'd be a joke about long hair is going to keep you out of Disneyland. So it made me wonder if at any time any of them had attempted to go to Disneyland with their children and not been allowed in. I have not found proof of that, but I wonder why they were particularly mad at Disneyland. I don't know. And then, of course, often they would do things like this. Mickey said, Peter, I've got an idea. And then the little light bulb, and Peter would say, wait, let's hear Mickey's idea. So often they were speaking to the audience, which was a particular thing that we've talked about. Seinfeld gets credit for and whatnot, but these guys did it very early on. This is probably the most critical studies interesting thing, their identity construction. And of course, by that we mean when we look at an actor, many people assume they have the traits of their character, right? Tom Selleck is not, in fact, a Vietnam vet, right? Magnum PI doesn't exist, but we assume they have these traits. This was very difficult for these guys because normally on a TV show you'd be given a character name, right? The guys on The Big Bang Theory, that's not, it's Johnny Galecki, it's not Leonard, right? So we know that they're acting, they have a fake name. On this show, for whatever reason, they chose to use their real names. Not them personally, but the producers chose to have them use their real names. So right away, the audience is lost between who's Michael Nesmith the man versus Michael Nesmith the actor on the show, right? Versus all these other Michaels that are going to be invented. Here, what's really triply interesting is in the very first pilot, they gave Mickey Dolenz the name he'd used on Circus Boy. That's his acting name, because when he was a child, his dad didn't want people to think that he got the job because of who his dad was. So on Circus Boy, it stars Mickey Braddock. So as they were putting the show together, the original credits give him that name. By the time it finally gets on the air, they've gone to Mickey Dolenz. Don't know why, but now suddenly the character, the goofy, crazy one, is Mickey Dolenz. And the problem with that is we don't know who the real guys are. And above and beyond the character you are and the person you are in your publicity, the fan magazines were going crazy back in the day, and they were inventing a persona for you. Mickey Dolenz's sister, who tours with him musically now, wrote a column, What It's Like to Be Mickey's Sister, which you're pretty sure wasn't anything that actually happened in their family, right? And when Davy Jones decided to get married, it had to be kept a secret, because nobody wanted the cute boy to be married, or girls would feel guilty for wanting him. That would be a bad thing to do. So his wife would have to travel separately when they were leaving the country with the kid, and sometimes she'd hang out with one of the other band members, not one of the major guys, but like, you know, the backup guitarist or something, and they would look like they were a couple traveling behind the Monkees. Meanwhile, he's going to press events with Sally Field. And the fan mags are all telling us Gidget and Davy are about to get together, or Gidget and Deanna Martin are about to get together, right? All of that to feed the press and the newspapers, not the real guy at all. But that's a third version of who he is, right? So this, man, it messed them up, and it messed the audience up. Because in America, we're not good with the idea of Renaissance people, that people have more than one talent. So in fact, when the show goes off the air, it's very hard for any of these guys to get work again, because everybody thinks they're this goofy set of guys who lives in that funny apartment on Malibu, and they're not really serious, right? Mickey Dolenz is going to leave the country and go to England and become a director for 15 years, and he directs children's television programs that are classics in England, right? So he was going the Ron Howard, I'm not going to be Opie anymore thing. And then he got drawn back to the States for their 20th anniversary tour and has been touring ever since. But had he not given up being a director, who knows where he might have gone with his directing, right? But he couldn't get taken seriously as an actor here in the States, even though he'd had his own TV show when he was 10, and he had his own TV show when he was 18, and they were both hits. So, but his acting career, nobody believed, right? Because he was just the goofy guy. Mike Nesmith wanted to be more of a songwriter and a country songwriter. Nobody took him seriously. He started the first national band. It didn't work. He ended up going off and running his own video company, and he's now a millionaire, so he's happy. And Davy Jones probably had it the worst because being a boy teen idol, look how hard it was for Justin Timberlake to grow up, right? I mean, that is the hard position for a man to grow out of. So we're not good with Renaissance people, the fact that you can have more than one talent. And my non-monkey example of that is Cher. Because when Cher was doing rock music and she wanted to act, everybody said, well, you can't do that, you're a singer. Then she got an Oscar for Moonstruck, and she got Best Supporting for Silkwood. And then she wanted to go on tour again. Like, well, you can't be a singer in a concert. You're an actress. How about both? Maybe we can actually do more than one thing. So America's not good at that. And it really harmed them when the show was over. For a little moment, Mickey Dolenz was considered to play the Fonz on Happy Days. But they were afraid his fame coming into the show would be too hard to make you understand and believe the rest of the characters. So as we know, Henry Winkler got that job. Right? But that might have been his next TV show. So identity construction was a mess for these guys. And it really, I think, was sad. Because now we're a little better. We understand that Jim Parsons is not just Sheldon. He's now on Broadway in The Boys in the Band. He did Act of God, which toured here in California. We understand he's an actor. He can play other parts, right? Now, because there was this idea that they weren't very important and that they disappeared, I like to show how culturally connected they were. It is proven in a memo from Gene Roddenberry that when Star Trek went for the second season and they're going to have Walter Koenig play Chekhov, he wrote, I need him to have a haircut that matches that guy on the Monkees, because that's what girls want right now. And they literally planned that his character should be connecting with the girls who like the Monkees. And Star Trek, obviously, is culturally kind of important, a little bit. Of course, back in the day, they were part of commercials, because everybody was part of commercials. If you go to YouTube, you'll see their Nerf ball commercial. They have a Schick razor commercial. They did everything. But this was at the end of the show often, right? They also had their own comic book, and comic books are cool. We always love a comic book, so that means you've seeped into the culture at the moment. Peter Tork was at the Monterey Pop Festival, and at one point, they asked him to quiet the crowd down because a rumor came that the Beatles were there. And they weren't. And people were getting agitated that they'd been lied to. And they asked Peter Tork to stand up while the Grateful Dead were performing, interrupt the show, and say, I just need for you all to calm down. And they listened to Peter. He was that important that he could shut the crowd up at a rock festival, right? An early version of Coachella. So I think that's pretty cool. Hirschfeld, if you know anything about Broadway musicals and Broadway performance, Al Hirschfeld does drawings of all the famous people in New York. For TV Guide, he did this drawing of the Monkees in 1966. So they were important enough for Hirschfeld to do a drawing of them, which is pretty cool. They were friends with all the Beatles. So much for the Beatles not taking them seriously. And they were friends across their lives. Of course, this is Mickey many years later with Ringo and Graham Nash, right? This is him, and of course, Paul McCartney. And up here we got John. John Lennon would come to Mickey Dolenz's house and they would jam and hang out because Mickey's wife was from England. And so when Lennon was in town, he liked to go to the Dolenz house because she knew how to serve tea at 4 o'clock. Most American girls weren't doing that, right? So they already had a cachet. Then the show gets off the air and they go into reruns and they put them on Saturday morning because the television people think that it's a kid's show. And they don't think about all those other references and how serious the show was. So they're in reruns on Saturday morning, and in the 70s, still so important that when Marcia Brady wants a prom date, she writes to Davy Jones. And of course, he comes, and he sings at her prom. Isn't that adorable? He was voted the #1 teen idol of all time about 2 years before he died. And that's over all the other guys you can think of, David Cassidy, who comes after him in the Partridge Family, and anybody you can think of. So that's a big deal, right? After their show was canceled, they appeared on Laugh-In. Look at those great hippie clothes. So they were still considered cool enough to show up on the coolest new show. And the sad part of that is the show was canceled because after 2 years, they didn't want to do a comedy anymore, a sitcom, a situation comedy. They wanted to do a variety show with rock and roll music and bring in their rock and roll friends. And the network said, oh, that'll never sell. And the next year, Laugh-In came, Smothers Brothers came, the Sonny and Cher show came, and rock and roll shows were all the rage. But because they didn't let them do it, they all chose to quit at that one time, which is too bad. But this is also in the 70s. In the 70s, they're still selling 16 magazine. They're still front page worthy material, right? The show's been off the air for a few years. You could buy a honeycomb cereal and get the record on the back. And you cut the record out and put it on your turntable, and it played. It was a plastic over the cardboard, and you could play a record that, that was your free gift on your cereal. Again, in the 70s, based on their reruns Saturday morning. In the 80s, MTV ran a marathon and brought them back in their 20th anniversary. It was a one weekend. It was called Pleasant Valley Weekend. And Rachel Maddow interviewed Peter Tork after Davy Jones died, and she said to him, I learned what it was like to be a kid in the 60s from watching those reruns when I was a kid in the 80s. And he couldn't believe that she even knew who he was. So even in the 80s now, they're coming to a new group. And actually, I'm going to pop this for a second. Let me see if I can find it in here, sorry. This is one of my favorite things because this is from the 80s. Here it is. This is Ringo Starr. This is a commercial from the 1980s during their 20th anniversary tour.
Stuffed crust pizza from Pizza Hut with cheese baked into a new thinner crust. You'll want to eat it crust first. Now with free garlic dipping sauce. Good idea. Not the lads I had in mind. Large is $9.99.
They didn't even have to tell you who they were, right? They just stopped. That's so funny. I love that. So that's how important they were, right? In the 80s, their show's been off the air for 20 years, and they're still something that people are paying attention to. In the 80s, they got a star on the on the Walk of Fame for the TV show, not the music. That's how important the TV show was. That's their star, right? And at this point, they ended up with a manager. They'd never had a manager before, and he started the whole tour thing. So in their 50th year, the Archie comics had the Monkees guest star. This just came out a couple of months ago. And that's a huge, wow, the Monkees are in the Archies, right? The Archies, side tangent, were invented because Don Kirshner, the music director of the show, would pick their songs. And Michael Nesmith didn't like his taste. And he wanted him fired, and he was eventually fired over the song Sugar Sugar, which was supposed to be a Monkees song. But Michael Nesmith refused to sing it, and so Don Kirshner invented the Archies because it's a group he could make do whatever he wanted. That's where they came from. Had the Monkees done Sugar Sugar, we wouldn't have the Archie comics. And of course, the Archie comics, another side tangent, had become Riverdale. It was a big show, right? And a big show because you all know him from your own childhood TV watching, right? So the grown-up version, so it's like Circus Boy becoming a monkey. It just happens over and over again, right? All right, you've also all known a Monkee song all your life, even if you didn't think you did, because in Shrek they used I'm a Believer. So now we're years behind. We're 30 years from the show being on the air, and a whole run of children know this song. Right? And this is Mickey Dolenz closing song in all his concerts. This is his song, right? Breaking Bad, in the season before it went off the air, did a whole montage of putting meth together to the Monkees song Going Down, because Vince Gilligan was a Monkees fan when he was a kid. So his chance to use Monkee music in his own TV show was something exciting for him. Likewise, Mad Men did an episode that used a song from the Monkees. So highly rated Emmy-winning TV shows are airing their music to a whole new generation. I thought that was cool. Grace and Frankie, if you haven't watched it, is an adorable show with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda. In their second season, they were telling secrets from their childhoods, from their teenhood. And Lily Tomlin's secret, Frankie's secret, was she'd had sex with a monkey. And the question was, which one? And Jane Fonda guessed Mickey. And that was the answer. And I said, you people did not research this program. The Lily Tomlin character would have had sex with Peter Tork. That's her boy. That's the hippie. Not Mickey, right? Mickey's the name most people recognize. But I thought it was adorable just watching the show. Bam, a Monkees reference. You cannot get away from the fact that they're still culturally relevant. I totally forgot my Simpsons thing. So, of course, in the 50th year, my book came out, which made me very happy. And it's on our little new author thing right when you walk in, so you can rent a copy. Also, they released an album. In their 50th anniversary year, they got together with a bunch of modern songwriters, and they released an album that was in the top 10 because it was written by a whole bunch of famous people. Of course, that's me outside Warner Brothers because, you know, I had it and that was pretty cute. This is the album. All these songs are written by people that you've heard of, like Rivers Cuomo, Andy Partridge, Ben Gibbard, Noel Gallagher. They're all famous current rock and rollers who were brought together by a producer who said, if you could have lived in the 60s and written for the Monkees, what song would you have written? And they all wrote a song that they thought was particular to their taste. And so Ben Gibbard has actually been a couple of the tour dates. He came in and sang with them, which was great. So, and this is him talking about before the Beatles, before Velvet Underground, before punk or indie rock, the Monkees were the first band I truly loved. They influenced so many of today's modern day performers, and yet people keep forgetting about them. So I think that's important. You Bring the Summer was the first release off that album, and in a second I'll play a little clip from it, just for fun. During their tour, I got to finally meet them. I had interviewed Mickey on the phone for my newspaper article, but I was invited backstage to do a photograph, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, because, you know, in 1980, I had another picture with Mickey. Right? So I'm like, ah, look at us. Yeah, there you go. So that's pretty cool. So they're pretty famous. And then we're back to who I am and what I'm working on. And this is a bunch of stuff I used for research, but not nearly all of it, of course, because I had to do a lot of work in our library. That's what libraries are so wonderful about. And so, since we have a moment, what I'll do is I will show you the thing that I was going to show you. This is Peter talking at Monterey, very short bit, quieting the crowd down.
Because of long-standing friendships with individuals, as well as I like the music. I'd like you to welcome now, with a great big round of applause, my favorite group, the Buffalo Springfield.
I think that's so cool. Whoops, stop. Yay. There's that. And then, just for fun, if you don't know their theme song, you should. But if you do, and you speak Spanish, because there wasn't a Spanish version, but there's an Italian version. Identity confusion? They played with it in the closing credits. Stop. Which I think is adorable and cute. Let me get back to where we were. All right. That's the Monkees. That's why you should watch them and read about them and listen to that music, because they're pretty cool. Thank you for coming today. It was lovely.
Please, questions for Professor Welch.
Nobody ever has any questions. I either talk too much or, you know.
So how about your favorite Monkee and why?
Well, that's a good question. It is Mickey. And this is my story from when I was little. And this happened twice, right? When the Monkees are out, you have to pick your favorite, because you and your friends are all going to play marrying them, right? In your basement when you're playing their records. And my cousin was going to marry Davy Jones. So I can't get in a fight with my cousin, because I love my cousin Louise. So no, not going to do that. So I picked Mickey, one, so that I wouldn't fight with Louise, and two, my theory was there's more girls in line for Davy. I have better luck with the guy with the shorter line. And that worked when the Partridge Family came out, because everybody wanted David Cassidy and I wanted Danny Bonaducci. I don't know why, but I figured the line would be shorter, so there you go. So yeah, and I do find Mickey was the one I spoke with when I interviewed, and I wanted to talk to an actor who knew how to work with writers, because he'd done that as a child. And I wanted to talk about what he thought was the influence of the writers. So we got a phone conversation. So still on my cell phone, it says Mickey Dolenz. And I'm sure it's a throwaway line they give to reporters. It's not his real line, so I'm not going to get rid of it. But it's kind of fun to like open my phone and go, oh, under D it says Mickey Dolenz. I have his number. So yeah, that's my story. But I also think he's one of the more interesting of them, even as I have gotten older, because of the experiences he had. I mean, he's well known in England, like I said. He produced some musicals there, and then he came back here and has done pretty well in terms of the tours. So yeah, he's my favorite. I've come to appreciate Mike Nesmith more. I think he was the oldest one, and he wasn't. Peter Tork was the old one, but since Michael was tall, they thought he was the dad figure. I didn't understand how important his writing was when I was a kid because I wasn't focused on that. But yeah, Mickey. Always Mickey.
You mentioned where they all went after the band, and you mentioned Mickey and Davey. And what about? Did you mention Peter? I didn't catch
No, Peter had one of those sad VH1, rock bottom kind of stories where he didn't do very well. He went back to Greenwich Village and he tried to do indie rock again, but nobody took him seriously. Because here's where identity construction hurts you. He was the dumb one on the show. So everybody assumed he was dumb when it turned out he played 6 instruments and had a music degree. He was the only one who was a trained musician. He was the best musician of them all and probably one of the smartest. And I learned this from one of the writers. When they were debating creating the characters, Mickey was going to be funny because the hair was funny, so that's the end of that, right, visually. Davey was the cute one. Mike was the dad figure, the stalwart one. And Treva Silmerman told me Peter could have been either the smart, geeky one or the dumb one. And in the writer's room, they were like, it's so easy to write dumb jokes, let him be dumb. And that's it. So he was stuck with it. People wouldn't take his music seriously when he stepped away, and it hurt him for a long time. Now he's got a group called Shoe Suede Blues, which is a rhythm and blues kind of band, and he tours with that, as well as touring back and forth with Monkees. So yeah, he had the worst one, rock bottom, climbed back out of it. They all lost their money afterwards, except Mickey Dolenz, because his mother, who had been an actress, took charge of his money when he started making it, and she banked it all. The other guys spent it all and were broke, so he did pretty well after that. Yeah?
So how did they all get chosen for the role?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Literally, it was an open casting call. And a bunch of, it was in the local papers, Variety. And David Jones had already been chosen because he'd come from a Tony nomination on Broadway. He played the Artful Dodger in Oliver. And so he was out here, he'd done an album. They were trying to make him the next teen idol, right? And so they picked him for the show to be cute. And then they auditioned all the rest of them. And on YouTube, you can see their auditions, which I've used in classes too, because other men are auditioning. And then I make students go, okay, which in this group would you pick? And we see if they pick the guys who actually got the job. So Mickey was next because they knew him from Circus Boy. And then Michael and Peter were musicians. And Michael's the only guy who came to the open casting call with no connection. Somebody knew him from playing music around town and said, you need to pay off your car. They're looking for guys to do a TV show. Why don't you go? And Peter was sent there by Stephen Stills, who auditioned for the show, and they said no to him. And Stills and Tork were friends, so he told Peter, look, you need a job. These guys are looking for somebody who looks like me. You look like me. And they hired Peter. So total open casting call. Anybody else?
Was there a time in the 70s or 80s where people got together and recognized that content that was hidden in a children's television show?
That's an excellent question, and I honestly don't think so. I think, there's a whole fan base out there that's been deeply involved in them for a long time, and those people did, but, it's like Comic-Con was a nerdy, weird thing to do, so liking the Monkees was a nerdy, weird thing to do for a long time. I really don't think it started to be, that attention became focused until the 50th anniversary year, and suddenly it's cool to know the Monkees now. Yeah, people they dismiss them because we dismiss what children like. Right? And we dismiss what girls like. We don't take girls seriously in this culture, right? And I think that's really interesting. And so now slowly, even now, I'm still the one going, hey, it's a great TV show. Everyone else is listening to the album. Yeah.
One more question. You mentioned that they had financial problems. Did they not, is this back before the days of syndication?
Isn't that sad? Yeah, residuals come out just about 66, 67. The folks on Gilligan's Island, you could write off your residuals. The network would say, look, no one's ever going to air reruns anyway because they weren't. I mean, y'all saw Back to the Future, that great line where he sees the TV show while he's at dinner with his mom and he says, oh, I love this one. And they go, how do you know what it is? And he said, oh, I saw the rerun. What's a rerun? They didn't exist. So they convinced the actors and writers, there's no such thing as reruns. Just we'll pay you, $1,000 for your rights in perpetuity. And that's it. You got a one-time payment, and then the thing ran and still runs. And that's true of Gilligan's Island, Hogan's Heroes, all those 60 shows. Almost none of those guys made any money at all. They made, back in the day, like now, look, Big Bang Theory, they make about $1 million an episode, right? Back then you made $4,000 to $5,000 an episode, which was a lot of money for back then, but doesn't last you 50 years. Well, thank you all very much. It was fun talking. Take a peek at all the stuff, and hope you have a lovely day. Listen to Monkees music. Listen to Good Times. It's a great album. It's online. Yay. Thank you. Thank you.